I can't wait any longer.
Let's go.
I can't believe you committed suicide. I cannot believe you committed suicide. How could you have done this? How could you have committed suicide?
Damn, we need to make this thing even.
I can't believe it's you. Don't tell anyone. I'm not ready for this. Don't tell anyone. Thank you.
Hello and welcome all you Breen Weavers. You're listening to My Scene with Breen, the only podcast dedicated to the film director Neil Breen. I'm your host, Neil Knipe, and I'm thrilled to say that with this episode we have hit double figures. When I started this podcast, I wasn't sure of how many people would be willing to donate their time to talk to me, or even if they'd be willing to talk at all. So it's really been wonderful to hear from so many generous people over the last several months. However, right now we're going to take one of our semi-regular pauses in chatting Breen with the people who have actually worked alongside him, and instead turn our attention to fans like you and I who enjoy these films from afar. And joining me to take a closer look at 2018's Twisted Pair is the Peabody and Emmy Award-winning Dan McCoy. Dan spent a decade writing on 1,579 episodes of The Daily Show with Jon Stewart and later with Trevor Noah, and currently co-hosts the hugely popular podcast The Flophouse, a film review show that has been running for over 15 years and has toured live across the US and Canada. But before we begin with Dan, as always, allow me to fact you up on Twisted Pair. Twisted Pair was Neil Breen's fifth film and stars Neil in dual roles as twins Cade and Cale Altair, two characters he would of course bring back in 2023's follow-up Cade: A Tortured Crossing. The film also stars Sarah, or Sarah, I'm not too sure which, Merritt as Alana, Cade's co-worker and lover, Greg Smith Burns as Bond-like villain Coos, and Brad Stein as a detective, whom I mentioned because he will be a future guest on this very podcast. As is tradition, the poster tagline doubles as a synopsis and reads, "Identical twin brothers become hybrid AI, open brackets, artificial intelligence, close brackets, entities yet are torn in different directions to achieve justice for humanity." Twisted Pair has a 4.7 out of 10 rating on the Internet Movie Database, 2.7 out of 5 on Letterboxd, and a popcorn meter rating of 67% on Rotten Tomatoes. Or tomatoes for our American listeners. Gina Radcliffe of The Spool said, "There's a seed of something interesting planted here. The villain looks like a dollar store Elvis Costello, carries a bowl of diamonds around, and talks like his voice is being disguised on an episode of Dateline NBC. Grady Balding of Cultured Vulture said, "Breen's film provides an antithesis to the overly hyped mercenary-for-hire/vigilante agent films seen today in American theatres." And Dega Olguing of The Charlatan said, "No film must reach perfection in order to be enjoyable." And this is a clear example of this. You can feel that Breen tried his best to deliver a legitimately good movie, something to be witnessed, preferably with a few friends and some drinks. I mean, the first question I would ask is your Neil Breen origin story. How did you come across Neil Breen?
I was trying to come up with this actually because I am 1/3 of a bad movie podcast, and we have come to, during the month of September, do smaller movies. We usually don't like to punch down. We like to punch up. Like, there's no point in making fun of a movie that no one's going to see anyway. So I have to sort of find these smaller movies, and those are harder to come by than the ones that we all know, were a flop in the theater or a flop critically or whatever. I forgot to say, we call it Smallvember due to my slip of the tongue. I meant to say Small Timber, and now it's Smallvember forever in the eyes of my co-hosts, who will not let me retroactively change my mistake and make it make more sense. So in September, we do Smallvember. I thought that maybe I'd read about it on the Onion AV Club, maybe from Nathan Rabin, who wrote a lot about flop movies or weird movies, and I would draw sort of suggestions from him from time to time. I couldn't find anything that suggested he had written about it, but I know I must have seen it somewhere. And I think that we were in one of the first waves of Neil Breen appreciation. I don't think we were the first, but I think we were one of the bigger things to draw attention to. Hey, if you like bad movies, this guy's doing some interesting stuff.
So, what attracts you to these movies, and where are you pegging these movies? Because you're saying you appreciate these movies, yet you're saying you do a bad film podcast. So, what's attracting you to these films?
Geez, that's hard to know. I have come to say recently that I think that only people who are really into movies tend to be into bad movies, because if you are only kind of into movies, you're not going to waste your time on a bad one. You're going to watch the movie that everyone recommends to you and is pretty sure you're going to like, but if you're fascinated with like the nuts and bolts of things, I think a movie that doesn't play by any of the rules is interesting to you. And certainly, I think you can learn as much about making a movie or writing a movie by watching a bad one than a good one. In the same way that, like, I think your mistakes probably teach you more than your successes. But also, I have gotten to the point where I've seen so many movies that there's like this weird craving within me that's like, show me something new. And in a weird way, the only way to see something truly new is to see someone who maybe doesn't know what they're doing, like is going to do something totally unique to them because they don't process the thing. They don't see what like it should be in life.
So, where does Neil Breen come, or how successful is he in that area?
Yeah, like he breaks your brain, I think, especially if you see him for the first time. Like if you watch all of his movies, which I think I have at this point, you start to see kind of the themes at least. You see where he's coming from, what drives him, even though it's also like maddeningly non-specific. One of the funniest things about him to me is how he's like constantly in his movies railing about the government or whatever, or corruption, but it's always in the most vague terms you could imagine. But I think that there's some people like drugs because they alter your perception. Like I feel like a bad movie can alter your perception, and it's funny that, I don't know, if you listen to our episode on Fateful Findings, which was the first movie that we saw, it's a fan favorite, but one of the weird things about it is it starts off with me talking about how I'm about to get a divorce. I'm remarried now. It's many years along, but it was sort of like a sad announcement that I felt I had to make, because I'm like, well, we have listeners. They'll wonder why I'm not talking about my ex anymore. But in spite of that, we all seem jazzed on that episode. Like it's beloved by listeners. It's because he showed us something new. We had a really fun time watching it and trying to pick apart what he was trying to do.
Does anybody come close to Neil Breen in doing this similar kind of thing?
There are these vanity project filmmakers who do films where they often sort of want to cast themselves as action heroes, or there's a lot of pumping yourself up that goes into certain type of movies when these people don't have any particular skill for the things that they're doing. There's one, Get Even, all one word, which I think also goes by the name Champagne and Bullet. He's like a guy who wants to be an action hero, and he also sings in it despite not being good at either of those things. That kind of has a similar feeling. There was we didn't do that one on the show, but I saw that in the Bad Movie Night. There was one we did on the show called You Me Madness, which is stars Steve Mnuchin's wife as kind of like I'm a super sexy lady who's also a brilliant serial killer, and it also seems to feed into this like power fantasy vanity project thing. I think that those are often some of the really richest, weirdest ones.
But they are all quite grounded, though, at the same time. If you think of, The Room, Champagne and Bullets, like you say, they're still grounded, aren't they? They're still kitchen sink dramas or action films. Is there anybody else who's doing what Neil Breen does, as in doing these huge, epic fantasy morality plays?
Most people who make movies, even if they don't know what they're doing, are sort of forced to do it within their means. Like there's some exceptions like Birdemic. I mean, the flip side of that, the most oddball, major movie that I've seen in the last several years was Cats, which is just like star-studded, all the money in the world, but similarly just a cavalcade of weird and baffling choices on behalf of the filmmakers.
You picked Twisted Pair because it's one you hadn't seen. You wanted to finish it off. How do you now compare this in his body of work?
So the biggest surprise for me watching it the first time around was again how he suddenly has really extra fallen in love with stock footage and like chroma keying or whatever, like compositing himself into these things and doing things like the scene where he says like stop, and like the whole video that he's in pauses so he can walk through it with his magic powers or whatever. Like that was the biggest surprise. So lacking that, the novelty of that, it's not one of my favorites. I think that my two favorites are Fateful Findings. And again, this might just be because of the situations I saw these in. Findings was my first one that I saw. And then I got to see Cade the Tortured Crossing in the theater with Stuart, one of my co-hosts, and to see what it played like with a crowd was terrific. And this, watching alone at home in preparation to talk about it, is maybe not the optimal way. My brain slid off it a little bit more than might have happened otherwise.
In your own words, what is Twisted Pair about?
His movies are all sort of hard to explain on a plot level, but I was having extra trouble with this one. So there's a pair of twins, Cade and Kale, and we see them at first via some stock footage of some twins. And he talks about how he loved playing on the beach with his stock footage dog. And they are enlisted by some sort of extraterrestrial force. They're given powers, which, I'm not quite sure what all the powers are. It seems that he can sort of like fly short distances, stop time, sort of stop bullets. I don't know. And they do these missions to protect the Earth, I guess, primarily. I don't know whether other planets are involved, but they are protectors of the Earth. And Cade was good at this, and his twin brother Kale was not, was kicked out of the program, which led him to becoming Neil Breen in a bad fake beard and mustache and a hoodie, the evil version of himself. And I have to admit, I'm not quite clear on how Kale then figures into the rest of the movie, other than we'll cut back and forth between the good and the bad twins, because there's a whole nother bad guy who's really sort of the antagonist. And that guy seems to have some sort of evil plan involving AI and virtual reality and the metaverse. And these are all words that Neil Breen seems to know, but not enough to integrate them into a plot in a way where I'm like, oh, that's why this is bad. Like he had the bad guys have like these people suspended in the metaverse that like Kale will torture them every once in a while, but I don't know what the deal is. Anyway, there's both Cade and Kale have girlfriends. Cade, the good guy, we are introduced to his girlfriend in a very distasteful way, where we see he like seems to be harassing her, and then later on we see this attempted rape scene that then turns out to just be like a sex game that they play, which is fine if that's your deal in real life. Like, I'm not here to tell you how to have your sex games, but it adds nothing to this movie other than making you feel really uncomfortable for a while. Like, and then the bad twin has a girlfriend that he does pills with all the time. And then at the end, for some reason, the good girlfriend is actually working with the bad guy, and they shoot each other, but since he's magic, he doesn't die, and they're briefly reunited, I guess, in the virtual metaverse, but she has to go off and be dead. And that's the end, as far as I could tell.
So Cade and Kale have been selected by a force. I don't think the word alien or extraterrestrial is ever used, but presumably it is. And there was some of this in Fateful Findings as well, and his past work.
We can talk about how in all of his movies he seems to be typically some sort of messianic figure, has a greater or lesser degree of magical powers, and sometimes he's a robot from the future or something, and like this might also be kind of colored by me while I'm reading the Wikipedia plot summary to try and see if like that would help me at all. So maybe someone put some lies on there about where this power came from that I then absorbed.
What do you think attracts him?
He does seem like he seems to have a bee in his bonnet about something. Like he thinks that humanity needs something. He needs help, and so maybe he wants to be that figure in an escapist way. But yeah, all of his like Fateful Findings, he complains about like secret government secrets without ever getting into what those secrets are. But apparently they're so terrible that people commit suicide over them. And here, yeah, like there's all this sort of just general talk about corruption, but I don't know what it is. He's mad about the world. Like this seems to spend a lot more time just sort of hanging out with these two guys and their girlfriends. And then towards the end, he says like, I'm going to take them down. If I'm not mistaken, like he says, I'm going to take these people down twice in the movie. Like it seems like there gets to a point where he's like, I'm sick of all of this, and like goes and explodes some things. And then like a few scenes later, he's like, I'm really going to take you down now, and does the same thing again.
Yeah, he blows up the pipelines, doesn't he, that are essential to Kuz's empire. But then presumably that doesn't completely work, because as you said, he then goes back to the HQ to properly take Kuz down.
And also there is some sort of sparkly fairy lady in the movie too that I didn't mention, largely because I don't know what her function was.
Well, she's a muse fairy, and one of the things that I am going to build up to is maybe trying to make some sense of Twisted Pair. And I don't know how you feel about this. Do you feel sometimes people are harsher on Neil Breen, and actually these things could make more sense?
A lot of stuff that people think are holes nowadays are just like the effect of the internet giving everyone a chance to nitpick everything, he said as a guy who runs a bad movie podcast. But we try not to do that. We try and be a little more open about it. Neil Breen, I think, is genuinely incomprehensible most of the time. It's wild, and a lot of it, I guess, is maybe it does make plot sense, but you're so lulled by these scenes that don't serve any apparent purpose that by the time something that tells you what's going on comes along, it gets lost in the weeds.
How convincing is he as an action hero then? Because we see his heroism. He guides some troops out of an exploding building.
He's a guy that seems like maybe he runs he's like a manager at a car rental place or so. Like he does not give off the vibe of action hero. He has neither the decisive sort of like intensity nor the like chiseled musculature of such a man. He says everything kind of the same sort of like affectless way, and then if he gets mad, it's just louder. I don't, like the thing is like certain people are not actors. I don't want to be mean about it. Like I kind of feel like God bless him for like doing the thing that he loves to do, but it's funny. It's extra funny to watch him be an action hero. There's certain like little effects in here, honestly, though, that even though they're cheap and not convincing, I enjoy them. Like whenever he like flies somewhere really fast, he like zips up somewhere. I'm like, okay, it doesn't look good, but it kind of looks more like something than a lot of the other stuff that's in the movie. There's part of me that's like the fact that this person doesn't realize, one imagines, that this effect doesn't work. Does that mean that there's something like different about them that we are laughing at? And I sort of hate that idea. I would not like that to be true. So to square my own moral circle, I do sort of like lean on the idea like, well, but this person has managed to put out a thing into the world that has brought many people a lot of joy, perhaps not in the exact way that he imagines it, but it is beloved.
And as you say, he's getting into the green screen. He's starting to dabble with it more and more. This is a film where, it's becoming more and more. And we know, of course, in his next film, Cade, it would be completely green screen. Is this an era of Breen you enjoy?
They both have their own charms. The interesting thing to me is that it is Breen on a very like small level, sort of like following the same trend as blockbuster films. Do I personally wish more blockbusters got out and shot on location? Yeah, like I think that we've hit a point where almost everything is done in front of some sort of screen or via compositing, like virtual, like landscapes, and it can be very wonderful if done well. But all of it is done that way, and it gets samey and boring. And I miss like going out to real places and having that feeling of real things. But that's the way it's happening, and Breen is doing the same thing, but with many fewer resources, and it's kind of interesting that it's following that same path, and for the same reasons probably. Like the big blockbuster films are doing it because they're like, oh, it's easier and cheaper for us if we can just do it this way. And Breen, having less money, is like, oh, easier and cheaper, you say? I'll do it too.
We find that he is this agent. He meets his kind of boss at his headquarters. Do we know who he's working for?
Some shadowy government agency. That is all that we know, I think.
And his boss shows him this blue glowing orb, which is programmable virtual reality. Do we know what programmable virtual reality is? Is not all virtual reality programmable?
Yeah. Yes, all of it is. I would imagine that maybe the idea is that this is somehow more fungible, like you can more easily sort of make it bend to like what you want without having to, specifically gear it a certain way. Like this is why I'm like, why is this evil? Like what I never am clear throughout the movie why this is evil other than the sort of general like idea I have about like in real life. Why like at the end of this movie, Breen's like hero characters like we're all going to live in the metaverse, and I'm like, okay, Mark Zuckerberg, like, but why? Like, why would we want to do this versus like living in our meat space, And so beyond sort of like a more general philosophical dislike of the idea that everything's headed that direction, I don't know what's going on.
Maybe you get the impression at the start that it's an anti-AI movie because obviously they've been taken, presumably against their will, they've been programmed this way. His brother has rejected it. There's obviously the line about the fact that this can never compare to the beauty of nature. But then, as you said, I think at the end we do get this kind of speech of this is the next step for evolution. This is the only way we continue. So where is Neil Breen standing on this then?
I guess he's one of these guys. It's like it's a tool like any other, Like he as the hero has been blessed with all these great things because of technology, but only he, as a super messiah figure, it can be trusted with it, and he has to go around blowing up all these other people with his After Effects explosions.
Who do you think does the best performance then?
Again, he seems to be drawing from a pool of non-actors that he can sort of get to, I'm presuming, answer an advertisement. I guess I would give it to sort of, I call her the good girlfriend. I mean, she's a turncoat at the end, but then also I guess she truly does love him in the metaverse, unless that's his AI fantasy that he has created. That part confused me. Maybe we can talk about it later on.
You've obviously mentioned the interesting scene where Cade bumps into Alana, he apologizes. says that he will meet her back at 8 o'clock. He'd like to take her out to dinner. She doesn't show up. He follows her home. He breaks into her house. They tussle on the couch. A glassless picture frame seems to get broken over him. And there's also that interesting voiceover, which seems to be punctuated with bitch every now and again. Now, I know you've said that the scene kind of seems a bit out of place. I think there might be a reason for it. There might be a reason. Why do you think it's out of place?
I don't know that I see any reason to introduce the girlfriend with this fake out sexual assault other than sort of like, oh, well, this provides kind of a cheap surprise, especially when you're told that this is the good twin. And then you're like, wait, this is the good twin? Like, it really makes you turn against this character pretty heavily. And then you're like, oh, okay, I guess you got me. Like, this is part of your erotic play. I don't know where you're going with this. Maybe it's sort of foreshadowing the fact that she's a baddie at the end, but I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I wonder. Is this a case of foreshadowing to a certain extent? Is it showing us, their roles? They're both spies, they're undercover agents, and different things, and that is their job. Is that they take on these different roles? So we see this as well in their relationship, in their love life.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get too much into like making assumptions about people, but I'm much more apt to find an uncomfortable reason for this to be.
Are you saying maybe it was just a good excuse for Neil to wrestle a lady on the couch for quite a prolonged period, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it's odd.
We discover that Kale, as you said, the bad twin, has kidnapped these three people: a lawyer, an executive, a bank president. One has an interesting makeup effect.
It's feels like a pre-made mustache that you get a little spirit gum and you dab it on.
The tash on the kidnappees is unusual because it does look like it's kind of masking tape, and there is very sparse, just kind of patches of hair on it. Later on, we then see another fake mustache. That's a little bit better. There seems to be a bit more on there. I don't know whether it was running out of fake hair or not. But
you think that the 7,000 that he raised on Kickstarter or whatever wasn't enough?
Yeah, I presume that 7,000 rang out when they got to the makeup for certainly for the facial hair makeup. Certainly, yeah. The big question is how intentional these things are. Is there any self-awareness there?
There was a brief period where I suspected, okay, maybe he's putting us on a bit, At this point, I think it would be a tremendous effort for a questionable payoff if he was self-aware. I think that he bears all of the marks of an outsider artist who, like, there are these themes that it seems like he's compelled to return to again and again. He's wanted to be a filmmaker and he found a way to do it. And he found a way like very specific to like, he doesn't, sell these things to stream somewhere. Like if you want to get most of these movies, you have to just talk to Neil Breen. You have to, send him some money to his website, and you'll get them mailed to you, burned, perhaps by his own hand. Who knows? And it seems to be successful for him. Like he is known, at least.
So Cade and Alana, they enjoy this little secret work passion session in the boardroom. What do you make of Neil's kissing technique?
It strikes me as a man who either has negotiated a very specific thing that is allowed, or the other person is avoiding full kiss contact.
And they end up at a restaurant which he's bought out himself. He gives her a gift of a lovely candle, this symbol of eternity. Did you find the location confusing? Was the location, the single kind of location, a bit detrimental here to the film?
Yeah, this was like one of the funnier locations from. It's clearly not a restaurant because there's no other patrons. There's no wait staff. It is a bunch of abandoned tables outside of I guess a school is what you're saying. Like it's it's on a plaza.
I think it's
Yeah,
Nevada
it's
State
nighttime.
University, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, yeah, it's nighttime. It's abandoned. No one's hanging out here. We'll pretend this is a restaurant, but we won't dress it as a restaurant. We won't put say menus around or or extra place settings.
I mean, let's do the list. I think the university, the college, it's the headquarters of the police. It's the headquarters of whatever agency he's working for. It's Coos's Laboratories HQ as well, maybe. I'm not too sure. It's the restaurant. And did you find that it makes it harder to follow exactly where you are and that lack of variation?
No, that's true. It doesn't give you a lot of geographical variance to be like, okay, well now I'm grounded somewhere. It's all the same sort of sea of concrete and conference room.
This gimmick of it all being shot at night, was there any relevance, did you feel?
I feel that it is probably a thing that came out of necessity, where it was like, okay, well, this will be abandoned at night. We're allowed to shoot here. I think that is.
But he could have
the
shot in some of the
beginning and end.
locations as well during the day, couldn't he? I suppose,
That's
some of those
true.
things,
But no, he's moved into his digital era. Like anything else, he's just gonna take care of with stock footage and compositing.
We're introduced to Coos, the villain, spelt Cuzzx. Now, am I right in saying isn't Coo in America? Isn't Coos a bit of a derogatory term for women?
Yes, yeah, it's a slang term. I think it is. I think it is specifically sort of derived, like it's a slang for vagina, and then that kind of like goes out to like just like we're gonna characterize women via the sex organ will be representative of women. Yeah, it's a weird choice on that level. And this guy, I kind of like his air as a villain. Like I talked about the Lynchian effects. One very simple thing that is done with him that I kind of thought was genuinely effective, even though it is completely weird and fake, is the digital lowering of his voice. And it feels strange and unearthly in a way that that actually kind of affected me, even though I don't think it's good per se.
Well, we can tell he's a villain because he kind of fondles that goblet of jewels. His scarf changes colour. We see his scarf change colour.
This is now you're doing a Prometheus thing.
Yes.
Cannot a villain have more than one scarf, sir?
Yes, of course they can. I mean, I would imagine a villain would have a plethora of scarves, a walking wardrobe of scarves, probably. But it's the fact that it changes on him, doesn't it? This kind of effect of it changing on him while he's wearing it.
I guess there might be this idea that like the voice is pitched down, stuff on him changes. Maybe this is a virtual figure in some way, one that is not quite human.
Are we seeing certain scenes, or is the whole film in some kind of virtual world, some kind of matrix? I mean, we've got, as we said, we've got the changing scarf on Coos, we've got the lowered voice. If you noticed, when Cade and Alana are together at one point, we see there's a second moon in the background. The cat's turning on the table, in Coos's room. The fact that it's all shot at night. And there's the bit where we see Coos later on, and it's a different actor. It's an older actor. It's a different actor. Is Breen giving us something here where we're in some kind of reality that's constantly changing, or things that it's another dimension? I don't know. Did you pick up any of this?
To sort of repurpose a phrase, don't chalk something up to evil when it could be incompetence. Maybe in this particular case, I'm predisposed not to chalk up to art what might be incompetence. But the collection of things you mentioned does sort of persuade me that it's possible that there is a Matrix-like other level going on here that like Breen has not made clear to us, but was intentional.
There's just so many of these little things you do, and because of the plot of the film, you do wonder, again, are we just over criticizing them at times? Is there meaning here, and are there connections and links? And we're just being unfair.
I mean, there's a point at which, like, does it matter? Where like I mentioned before, we sort of like got into the actual show, and we were just chatting before that. I'm like, I'm trying to write this screenplay, and part of that is getting notes from various sources, and I will get defensive, as all writers will, about it being like, well, you don't understand this. But the thing that then writers need to realize is, well, you might be right, they don't understand it, but doesn't matter. Doesn't matter where the fault lies. Like, something here is unclear that needs to be addressed. And similarly, maybe I'm being a little too unfair to Neil Breen, but at a certain point, I also don't care. The result is the same.
Coos' plan is to take over the world through biochemical and cyber control of human life support systems. It's later described as a cyber war, biological mutant warfare.
I really feel like, even more than in some other Breen films, like, he has words that he knows are connected to meanings, and so he throws them all out in the stew, but doesn't sort of do the actual work of making them clear. I can't fault him too much, because a lot of what people say in bigger movies, blockbusters, like on a technical level, is pure gibberish. The difference is that sort of the moment to moment sort of plot and character things are clear, so it doesn't matter. Like that stuff's the MacGuffin. It doesn't matter here, because none of it's clear. It's extra clear that, like, the tech stuff is nonsense.
And he goes undercover as an international investor and art collector. He meets Coos, and you've mentioned this character already, the fairy muse.
She is like, we say fairy, she's like a full-sized woman, sort of vaguely like Tinkerbell, or like if someone drinks absinthe in a movie, this fairy shows up. And the thing that distinguishes her, she has these wings on, and she sparkles. She has digital sparkles all around her.
When Coos flees, she disappears, presumably because she's not needed anymore, or she can't do what she wants anymore. There's the scene where Cale and his girlfriend Donna are kind of arguing, and he says, "We're done," and it glitches, and it repeats about 3 times. We're done. We're done. We're done. Again, a very obviously an intentional choice.
Yeah.
Again, is this another piece of evidence that we're in some kind of simulation? Or
this is convincing to me now. You've created enough of an argument that I do feel like maybe he intended there to be, that they're already in a simulation, that it's just levels of simulations. Because I had chalked that up to just more strangeness, but it's strangeness of a different sort than he usually does. He doesn't usually just like, he's not usually like, oh, this moment is so good, I have to repeat it 3 times in succession. It doesn't happen. So yeah, maybe this is a glitch in the Matrix.
Because the girl, Donna, the girlfriend, so they kind of split up. He leaves. She then opens the door to this mystery man in black, and I presume she's killed. She kind of leads him into the room. She wanders off. We get the butt shot. And then we see, because she's got a rose, we then see the man in black. I mean, at the university, what part of, in the Breen reality, I'm not sure what location that is, but he drops the rose on the floor. I'm presuming that means she's dead. However, we then see her later on.
Yeah.
But it isn't her, who I'm presuming is Donna, bumps into Cade, thinks he's Cale, and says, "Where's your beard?" He says, "I haven't got a beard." And she talks about how she was with Cale beat her, but it's not the same actress.
Is it not the same actress?
No, not from what I can tell. The hair color is different.
Okay.
The girl with Cale, who's in most of it, seems to have dark hair with maybe a slight reddish tint. And this girl at the end has dark hair, but it's been dyed blonde. And from what I can see, it seems to be a different actress.
I didn't pick up on it. And I think that it's just that like these movies put me into such a dream state that like things that should be completely obvious just like pass me by.
Again, we've got this with Coos being played by a different actor at one point. We now seem to have another character played by a different actor at this point. Again, I mean, this is really, again, just, me turning into me trying to convince you that there's more here. We discovered that Alana is a traitor. As you said, Cade then goes back to the Coos HQ to blow up his house. We see inside his cinema room. It would seem that a kind of international crime boss villain likes the films Ultraviolet, Finding Nemo, and has sketches of the Marx Brothers in his cinema room. But on the screen, we've got Pass Through, Neil Breen's previous film playing.
Oh my God. I feel just sort of embarrassed. The degree to which many of these things have just eluded me.
Yeah.
And I feel like I have to give back my whatever sort of sense of authority I have on either films in general or Neil Breen in particular by how baffled I've been by many of these points.
Another comment you see kind of put around the internet is people obviously talk about how these films can be quite hard to understand or to make connections between, and people say, I don't think Neil even understands his own films. Again, is that something you'd go for? Do you think that maybe again Neil is just putting these things together in that way?
There's a couple different levels that you can understand a thing on. Like I think that sort of on the subconscious level, I don't think he understands all that he's revealing psychologically about himself and the themes that he's returning to and stuff like that. I think on the plot level, as difficult to understand as they are for us, I suspect they are clear to him in a similar way that writing it at any skill level, one of the tough things is to gauge how much you're close to the material, too close to the material. Like you don't want to over explain something that's going to be annoying for an audience or a reader and like it's going to get boring or whatever. But the other danger is like you're so close to the material that you assume all sorts of things are clear that aren't. And I kind of feel like the latter happens with a lot of his stuff, or he's not equipped to make them more clear, whether or not he understands that they're unclear.
And then that kind of links in with Cale's story. As you said, Cale's kind of there for most of it just to torture these three corrupt, greedy CEOs. Where do we end with Cale's story?
He just sort of wanders off. Like I like it doesn't seem. That's what's confusing to me about like why are there these twins, unless it is metaphorical to Neil Breen in some way, where it's like, okay, yeah, there's the good half and the bad half, and and maybe that's why we're introduced to the girlfriend in the way we are. Like he's play acting badness or whatever, like just to show that it's all part of like humanity or something. But I don't think from a plot standpoint it ever amounts to much of anything.
Well, is Cale a bad guy? Is Cale doing anything that Cade would disapprove of or Neil Breen would disapprove of, bearing in mind what Neil Breen's characters have done in previous films?
He doesn't seem to be involved in any sort of the supervillainy that's in the rest of the movie, but like the bad stuff he's doing is on a very like basic human level, like he's taking too many pills with his girlfriend, or they get into a fight and like hit each other, which is an abusive relationship in life is not a funny thing, but as depicted in this movie it is funny because it is basically slapping with clearly no connection, but then like an obvious like punch sound effect added on after the fact, and then at the end of the fight he pushes his girlfriend off the bed, but in like the gentlest manner because he doesn't want to hurt this woman, and they aren't good at fight choreography, and she sort of tumbles in slow motion, and then cut to him outside like walking away, and the ambulance is coming, and I'm like, is he on the run now? Or are we to believe that like he killed her with that slow push off the bed? Like, apparently not, because she's still around later. Or maybe he did. Maybe that's the other girlfriend. I don't know. But it's an odd situation. I don't know that there's a point I was building to, but that's the way it plays out.
And what is Coos' fate? Because Coos flees. We see him picking up the jewels, fleeing. But then later we see the bloodied hand on the jewels.
Let's see. He disappears. Wait, the woman disappears.
Coos flees. We see him run off. But we see the three kidnappees kind of eventually die. Kale leaves a building. Again, this is where it makes it harder because we're not exactly sure what that building is, seeing as it's been about 5 different things. Kale leaves. He puts his hood up. He walks away. Then we cut to Coos' hand, what I'm presuming is Coos' hand, blooded on the jewels. At first, you presume Kale is walking away from the 3 kidnappees. Is he? Is he actually walking away from Coos?
Yeah, it seems like ultimately maybe Kale, the so-called bad twin, is the one who deals the final blow to the bad guy. But then, yeah, it's a hand. It's a bloody hand. That's the bad guy, not Kale, because there's a big ring on it.
Yeah.
Although I wouldn't be surprised if it was actually Neil Breen's hand, confusing the matter.
Yeah, I think it probably is.
More. It really muddies the water of this whole good bad twin thing, because ultimately it seems like Kale is like not a nice fellow, but he also is trying to maybe get back into the business of protecting the earth.
And after, obviously, Alana and Kate shoot each other and Alana dies, we get that kind of big Romeo and Juliet type moment. Kate says then, to save humanity, we will live in a virtual metaverse, virtual universe, living in our own world. So the outcome then is that, to save humanity, we all need to live in a virtual world?
They shoot each other, Cade and his girlfriend, but only she dies because he's super Breen. And then they are reunited briefly in I guess the virtual world. It's again unclear to me. Like, it's not, I think, explicitly said that this is what's happening, but I think that that's what's happening. And they walk off. I don't know why she is now there with him and, quote unquote good. I mean, I guess it's like, well, my work on Earth is done. Like, I don't have to be part of that evil thing. Like, now that that's moot, we can be together because I did love you. They walk 10 feet away from the camera. They pause for a long time, which when I was watching it, I'm like, okay, I guess that's it. And then she's like, I have to go. I can't stay with you or whatever. And disappears into ones and zeros or heaven or whatever comes next here. I guess, she came back for the, reconciliation or whatever. But I found it so strange that they like walk off like they're going to walk into the sunset together. And then she stops and she's like, oh, psych, actually, I got to go. And then that's the ending.
And we get the kind of the I'll be right here, the E.T. moment. It's often
literally a line from E.T. I'll be right here, pointing to his heart. And
even the intonation seems exactly the same as it does in the film.
I was like, the balls of you. Like, for a long time, the most successful movie ever. And you're just like, well, I like that line. I'm just going to take it the same way. I'm going to use it the same way. I'm going to take it. It's going to be mine now. Okay.
Now, the ending to this isn't as radical and extreme as things like Pass Through, where 800 million people or however many are slaughtered. But I wanted to bring up something that you guys said on the Flophouse. To me, Neil Breen seems to be a liberal, yet his answer in the films seems to be very extreme, very right wing, very slaughter them all. But you guys kind of went as far as joking about it's fascist. He's a fascist. How much do you put into that?
I have no idea, for real. But, based on the art, like, it really does seem to be wipe them out, let God sort them out, and I am God. Like, I am the high power, And the right thing to do is that I will decide that a bunch of you will die because you are bad. And if that's not fascist, what is? You know, he is the one in charge, you know, to like the Crow joke from Mystery Science Theater where he's like, what do you want for Christmas? Like, I want to decide who lives and who dies. Like, that's literally what Neil Breen wants, and he gets it in his movies. And, you know, in a certain level, like, good for him for putting it in his movies rather than being like that, presumably in real life. But it's a bad message, at least one to return to over and over again. Like, it gets a little more alarming the more he returns to it. If it's just in one movie, you're like, oh, okay, well, that's what that movie's about. But if it's in all his movies, I'm like, oh, well, this is what his brain is about.
How do you feel then his films over this career have evolved? Have they evolved in a way you like? And what do you hope for the future? Because, you know, we know he's working on his 7th film. What do you hope for the future?
Like I said, the main evolution seems to be technology, means of making these films. It seems like he's got his little sort of cottage industry of himself that will ensure that he can keep making movies if he wants to. Like, it's all very distinct. It's all very him. Like, I don't know if a Neil Breen movie would be the same if it didn't star Neil Breen and have Neil Breen in charge of most things. Like the Cade screening we saw, there was a laugh every time a new credit came up on screen at the end that was him. But, you know, let's see if he's gonna grow as an artist, let's see if he could do a movie where he's not at the center. I'm just kind of curious. Maybe it wouldn't be as fun, maybe it wouldn't be him, but I just kind of want to see what it'd be like. I personally would rather he go back to the way it was done before, without so much reliance on green screen. It was fun for a couple of movies to see this wacky sort of like Tim and Eric, but for serious, really trying, but still looking like that. But that aesthetic can only carry you so far, and I think we've lost something.
Well, it's not every day you get to talk Neil Breen with an Emmy Award winner. As always, it's a huge heartfelt thank you to Dan McCoy for talking to me there, but also I need to give a huge heartfelt apology to Dan as well. Dan didn't realise these Keen on Breen chats tended to go on a little longer than the My Sing with Breen ones, and that I edit these down as well, and I had failed to tell him all of that. So he wasn't prepared when our chat went on a little longer than expected, and he needed to get ready for an evening out to Broadway, to the new musical version of Death Becomes Her. Dan was far too professional to mention it on stream. Dan was far too professional to mention it while we were recording, so he sent me a message and I didn't see it because I was too wrapped up in our conversation. Luckily, he did manage to get the dinner for his family ready and attend the show on time. You can check out Dan's website at danmccoywriter.com and download the Flophouse podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. And don't forget to subscribe to it as well, of course. You can also follow the Flophouse podcast on Instagram at the Flophouse Podcast. As always, please rate, subscribe, like, share, and spread the word to all fellow Breenweavers. If you subscribe right now, then you'll get the next episode the moment it's released, and rating this podcast helps to get it out to as many Neil Breen fans as possible, and maybe, who knows, create some new ones as well. Before I get off, I am being inundated with requests for more information on Breenfest 25, the only convention for dedicated Breenweavers, and what is already being called a magical day. I can tell you that as part of the event lineup, we'll be holding a special variety talent show with acts from all around the globe. The speed eating champion from the UK, Russell D, will be attempting to eat several kilos of green salad in 5 minutes. The Italian Olympic marksman, Federico Nilo, will be hitting laptops from 25 metres away by tossing hardback books at them. There'll be a Guinness Book World Record attempt as Brazilian strongman Iago Sanchez tries to smash as many glassless picture frames over his head in 1 minute as possible. The renowned spiritualist, The Being, will be holding a sermon and promising to transform the elderly into the young and make the lame walk. And finally, we'll have star of Fateful Findings herself, Danielle Andrade, who played the young Ali, who will be given an exclusive reading of her school report on African elephants. Eat your heart out, San Diego Comic Con.
You've been listening to My Scene with Breen, a Neil Breen podcast and a Bite My Thumb production. Your host was Neil Knight. Bite My Thumb can be followed on Twitter or X at Bite My Thumb, on Twitch at twitch.tv/bitemythumb, on YouTube at bitemythumbtv, or on Letterboxd at bitemythumb. All music was written and created by Cotsplays. He can be followed on Twitch at twitch.tv/Cotsplays, where every Saturday morning at 12 p.m. he'll be making live music. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and rate this episode.